For over 50 years, the name Charles Savarin has been synonymous with public service in Dominica. Beginning as a teacher in the early 70s, President Savarin has devoted his life to the development of Dominica, serving in several capacities including teacher, trade unionist, politician, diplomat, government minister, and president. Becoming only the second person to complete 2 full terms as President of Dominica, President Savarin has since demitted office and has retired to private life. Director of the Government Information Service, Mr. Daryl Titre, sat down with President Savarin and got him to tell it all.
The beginning is 80 years ago.
Wow.
Well, actually, I'm from Portsmouth. I was born in Portsmouth. I attended the St. John's School in Portsmouth. My parents had 7 of us, so I am the 4th of 7. 3 before me and 3 after me, so right in the middle. And from the St. John's School in Portsmouth, I came to the grammar school in Roseau. And after spending 7 years in the grammar school, because we had no state college in those days, so we had a 6th form. We didn't call it a 6th form college. It was the 6th form of the grammar school, which you did after the 5th form when you did your external exams. And because we had the best labs, science labs, we had a physics lab, we had a biology lab, and we had a chemistry lab.
Yes.
So 5th formers from the convent and the St. Mary's Academy, and sometimes from the Wesley High School, would come to the grammar school for science subjects and so forth. So although they had their labs, but if you wanted to do 6th form work, then you came to the grammar school because the labs there were better than the labs in the other schools. And you did 2 years in the 6th form, and then you started what we then called higher school. So you had the senior Cambridge, and then you had higher school, which would be equivalent to what we now call the associate degree at the Dominica State College.
Now, growing up in Portsmouth,
yes,
like all of us, you were once a little boy, although
oh,
I'm not too sure many people can picture that. Like always, tell us about your childhood in Portsmouth.
Well, I mean, you have to understand that Portsmouth in the late 40s, early 50s, we had no electricity. We probably had just about 3 paved streets. Most of the streets in Sikak and Lagon and Granville were not paved. Most of the houses had no running water. You had standpipes. So you went, and I carried water in a bucket, sometimes on my head if it was heavy, sometimes in my hand. And you did what all school children did. You ran about the place, you went for the mangoes in the afternoons, and kennips and fat pork and things of that nature. You played in what we call the Mang, which is Benjamin's Park, actually. When it rained, it was flooded, and you played football in the flooded park. But cricket was a different matter. You needed dry days to play cricket. And you had school games. The St. John's School and the government school were a friendly rivalry, like in those days, the grammar school and the St. Mary's Academy. And you did this. You used to have, we didn't have independence because we were not independent, but you had what they called Empire Day, which when the schools came out and the schools paraded around the town with drums and so forth. And then you had games, school games, in Benjamin's Park. And that is what you did. For school holidays, I went to my grandparents in the country. just close to Clifton, a place we call Hermitage, and spent a lot of time there. In fact, it's a place of fond memories. Did a little rock fishing, and all of the things that you do at that age and at that stage of your development.
What did your parents do?
My father migrated to Curacao, in my early primary school years, where he worked in the oil refinery in Curacao. A lot of Dominicans migrated to Curacao and Aruba at that time. Robert Douglas, Perry Alcide, the Dubois brothers, including Culan Dubois, who became pal rep for Cottage, the Olivaches, including Ophelia's father. At that time, in the 40s, the mid-40s, Curacao and Aruba had the largest oil refineries in the Western Hemisphere. And the oil refined there was very important for the war effort. And since the Curaçaoians and Arubans were not very keen to work in the refineries, the company, the petroleum company, Shell, recruited people from the Caribbean, so not just from Dominica, from all over the Caribbean. And so my father spent about 12 years. He would come home once every 4 years on vacation. His brother was also there, my uncle. And a lot of Dominicans, a lot of Eastern Caribbean people, a lot of people from further afield. My mother was a seamstress, and she was also a cake maker and this type of stuff. So she would make wedding dresses, first communion outfits, and so on. And so that is basically what she did. My grandfather was a farmer, and so that is what we did as children. And when my father came back from Curacao in the early 50s, he did some farming, he ran a shop, he also ran a trucking business and so on. In those days you didn't have buses.
Yes, truck.
So the Bedford trucks had boxes, and these boxes had seats, and people traveled. It's a passenger truck. Then you could remove the seats and it became a banana truck. And then you remove the box completely and then it would move chattel houses. So you would, without the box, on the chassis, you would then move under these wooden houses which are on pillow trees and so on, and you can move the house from one part to another. And so on. A lot of the houses were chattel houses. People didn't own the land on which the houses were. And therefore, if whatever it is that occurred and they had to relocate, you didn't move the house, you got a truck or something. And if you didn't have a truck, you would move the house onto the street. You would have runners. That would be, say huge posts or trunks or whatnot, which you would grease and pull the house. Men would have ropes around the house and so on, and you'd have... Yes, the way you see sometimes people pull in a seine. So they set up a chant and so on, and they would heave the house and you move it a few yards and do that, and that is all you move.
Did you participate in that?
I never pulled a house. No, I never pulled a house and so on, but I saw a lot of that being done, which is an interesting thing and so on.
You have gone to the St. John's School.
Yes.
Let's talk about the grammar school for a bit. Tell us about your life at the grammar school.
Well, the thing is, and it always amazes me, that in the 50s, when we, well, first my eldest brother, then my second brother, then my eldest sister, and then I, as the fourth, came to Roseau. You first of all, your parents had to find somewhere for you to stay.
Yes.
Some person who would, quote unquote, board and lodge you. And you came into the grammar school very unfamiliar with Roseau. For most of us, it was either the first or second time you come into Roseau. The first time to sit exams.
Yes.
And the second time to go to school. So you virtually knew nobody. And those from Portsmouth who came to school with me, some went to the academy, and some of us came to the grammar school. About 4 or 5 of us
From all of Portsmouth.
From all of Portsmouth. In those days, there were 10 scholarships from the primary school, 5 boys and 5 girls. And fortunately, I was one of the lucky ones to get a scholarship to enter the grammar school. And at the grammar school, they all played sports because you had your house competition, and it was the business of every student to seek to win a point
For the house.
for the house.
Which house were you?
I was in Benedict Joseph.
BJ.
BJ. So you had your athletics, you had your cross-country races, and then you had your football and cricket, and you had your house competitions and things of that nature. I can't say that I was an expert sportsman. I did my little bit of running, I did my little bit of cricket, I did my little bit of football, but I never actually played for the school. I played for my house, but I was not good enough to make it on either the football team or the cricket team. For
All
the school.
boys when you went?
All boys.
Oh.
And we wore khaki shirts and khaki pants. And
Hose.
khaki hose, short pants and hose. And you could only wear black or brown shoes. You couldn't wear sneakers or anything that you want to. And you had a knitted tie.
Okay.
And when you were wearing the school uniform, you had to be on your best behavior, because if anybody from the community came to say that you were disrespectful in their presence, outside of school, I mean, wherever that was, you were likely to be disciplined by the school. And so the school would insist upon that you were a grammar school boy at all times, and you had to conduct yourself as a grammar school boy.
Who are some of your classmates that probably the country would know?
Well, my classmates would have been people like Arthur James, who retired as the principal of the Portsmouth Secondary School, Bing Kazimi and Norman later and Esmond later. I met people like Dr. Grell and Harris and so on as seniors. And in those days, sixth formers and prefects and so on were at a different level. You had to pay great attention and give due respect to your seniors.
Yes.
So people like Baba Dyer was a fifth or sixth former, Dr. Grell, fifth or sixth former, and these people. And but those who were fellow students in the first and second and third forms would have been the people that I mentioned. And so all of these people who have grown up, became civil servants, went away and came back as professionals and things of that nature.
Got in trouble at school?
Not really. I probably did get caned once. And probably attended a few detentions as well. But I would not say that I was a particularly difficult student.
In those days, were there graduations and that sort of thing?
We had what they call speech night, where the school, the entire school, came. Usually it was at the St. Gerard's Hall, and the headmaster gave his report for the year. There was usually a play performed, usually a Shakespeare. So the literature class and other students would have to perform, put on a play, and then we would announce who had graduated from the school. After several years, we sort of formed an association where you had a prom.
Okay.
So the one prom for all of the second,
schools.
because we were just boys, you can't have a prom for boys. So the convent girls and the Wesley High School girls who were graduating, and the grammar school boys and the SMA boys who were graduated, you'd have and that too was held usually at the St. Gerard's Hall and so forth. And that was great fun. The girls came with chaperones.
You had to be careful. What was your favorite subjects at school?
I like maths and geography. English and English literature, and a smattering of history and so forth. I was not very good at languages. We had to do Latin and French, and I was average in Latin and French, better in French than Latin, but we didn't do, I certainly didn't do Latin exams. When you reach the third form, you could decide to drop some subjects. We didn't do 13 and 18 and 19 subjects. We did 8. So you were able to drop some subjects, and then they began to combine zoology and botany into biology. And they began to combine history and geography into social studies. So some people, I personally always felt that there is a virtue in pure geography and history. And I think you lose some of the details of both subjects when you combine them into social studies. And similarly for biology and botany, I think you do more in each discipline than when you combine it into a single subject as biology. But I presume things move, and if you wanted to do a profession, you could specialize in any of the pure subjects that you wanted to do, but I presume at the secondary school level, an introduction into the subject was good enough.
You have now completed secondary school.
Yes.
Where do you go from there?
Well, when you leave or left the sixth form, you either went on straight to university or you went to work. I went into teaching.
Immediately?
Immediately. So I was a schoolboy in the sixth form in December, and I was a teacher in January. A lot of the others who were at school with me, particularly from Portsmouth, also went into teaching. John Alexis was at the St. Mary's Academy. He went into teaching. Leroy Mitchell, Vance LeBlanc, and all of these people. So I remained at the grammar school as a school teacher for 7 years. And,
what made you go into teaching? Why teaching?
I think basically you're looking for a job. The principal suggested that they would want a geography teacher and whether I would be interested. I said, yes, I had no other offers and so on. So I didn't have to go looking here, there, and everywhere. So it was very convenient that the headmaster thought perhaps I could be a teacher, and I accepted without hesitation.
I heard you were a very strict teacher, and I can tell you, Bottom Brain was the one who told me that. I heard you were very strict teacher.
Well, I hear he calls himself the brain, so I wouldn't. Well, I had grown up in the grammar school when the grammar school was very strict, and if you know, you will probably have heard of people like Archer and Medford and Goodrich and these people. These, in those days, most of the what we call masters came from the rest of the Caribbean, Barbados, St. Lucia, and so forth. And assistant masters, who were people who had graduated from the sixth form, were usually from Dominica, although we did get some from the colleges in Antigua, in St. Lucia and Barbados, who then went to university from the grammar school in Dominica. So when I started teaching, my designation would have been that of assistant master. We didn't call, for whatever reason, we didn't call secondary school or grammar school teachers teachers. We call them assistant masters, and of course the headmaster. And so, but I enjoy teaching. As I've said, I've never had a job I didn't enjoy doing. But yes, one could say that I, in fact, was strict as a teacher. I insisted, first of all, that you have to be able to control the classroom. You can't be in a class and people are throwing things about the classroom, running up and down, going through the doors, coming back in, banging desks and things of that nature. So I maintained tight control in the classroom, to the extent that if the class next door did not have a teacher, there would be absolute silence. Because Mr. Savarin was in the next classroom. So I think that the 7 years I spent at the grammar school as a teacher went very well. I was assistant housemaster and assistant sportsmaster after James was a sportsmaster and things of that nature. So we did sports, we did all of the things that we did at the grammar school. And both as a student and now as a teacher in the school.
What are some of your fondest memories as a teacher?
Well, we had in those days the technical wing.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who came to the technical wing were usually those who did not pass the common entrance exam. They were usually a year or two older. And they came in, and then when you went into those classes, so the teachers in the academic section also taught in the technical wing. So you went into the class and you took a class of boys who were weak in mathematics or weak in English or whatnot, and you were able to bring them up to the point where they could transfer to the academic wing and do the overseas exams. So you felt a sense of accomplishment that you had graduated, as it were, these students, so that, because at the time, more emphasis was placed on academic excellence than on technical proficiency, which perhaps was a mistake. But those are the values of the day. And therefore, the technical wing students did well when they could be graduated into the academic wing of the school. And you felt a sense of accomplishment when you could see your students, and then you see them as engineers, now as surveyors, now as tradesmen of significant competence.
So you got a few notable names?
Medical doctors, engineers, lawyers, and so on. But if you were to ask, and you haven't, which student I would think was perhaps the most remarkable student, I would say Emmanuel Joseph, who unfortunately has passed. He came to us, he was from Salisbury, from the United States. He came in, I think, into the third form. And he was a remarkably smart student. I mean, he would be not paying much attention and so on. When he would go home, he would bring back his work well done, but while people had been studying for hours, he would bring in and turn in very good work. Always got very good grades and so on. And when he graduated, he went to do medicine and graduated as a medical doctor. But he loved photography. So he already has his camera around his neck, even after becoming a medical doctor. He eventually migrated as a medical doctor. He returned and migrated and passed a couple of years ago, which was, we used to call him Joey. You know, it is Emmanuel Joseph. We would call him Joey. Both staff and students, everybody called him Joey. Yes, so that was one of my remarkable students.
You were at the grammar school for 7 years.
Yes.
After the grammar school, where did you go?
Well, what happened was, while at the grammar school, and the grammar school was represented by the Civil Service Association, but the primary schools were represented by the Dominica Union of Teachers. So as a staff member of the grammar school, I was recruited into the Civil Service Association because for whatever reason, the grammar school and primary school students, teachers were seen to a class structure, really. An absurdity, but that is how it was. So grammar school teachers were civil servants and primary school teachers were teachers. So having been recruited into the Civil Service Association and the Civil Service Association in the 60s, in the early 60s, 1960 in fact, having sought to revamp itself, I found really that there wasn't much being done. They would go to meetings, not very well attended. Some middle-level civil servants were in the executive committee. They would make the usual statements and so on, and the meeting would end, and that would be it. And we had what was being referred to then as Salaries Revision Commission, which were commissioners sent in from the United Kingdom, who came in, who looked about and so on, and recommended minor changes in salary. My first salary as a grammar school teacher was $141 a month.
$141.
$141
Wow.
a month. But as a grammar school teacher, you got this. If you're a primary school teacher, you got $122 a month. And so so you can well, and then I am from Portsmouth, I'm living in Roseau, so the expenses and challenges.
What year was that?
I began teaching in 1963. 1963. So in 1966, I attended one of these general meetings of the Civil Service Association and stood up on my feet and raised a lot of arguments as to what was happening, what was not happening, and so forth. And when elections came around, I was elected General Secretary. That was my first term as a member of the executive. At that time, the membership was 166. That was in 1966. And the subscription fee was $1 a month. And we rented a house in Bath Road, where I think the main entrance on Bath Road, well, the VIP entrance on Bath Road to the stadium was, I think it was called the Butler's House. And the rent was $120
a month.
A month. So we had 166. So we're all volunteers. Yes. Everybody, the executive, the general secretary, the ladies who came in and did some typing or what. We were all volunteers in there, and I began to think, well, look, this thing doesn't make any sense. I mean,
it was more of a club?
More or less. And we did have a club where we came in there, and we were overlooking the Windsor Park, so we could go at the back porch and we could watch games in the Windsor Park. And we played dominoes, we played draft, there was a piano, we had sort of a karaoke bar type of stuff. And for the people of that age, there was a famous bartender who we called Dando, who made a rum punch, and that was the height of the thing on a Saturday. We worked half day on Saturdays, not the teachers, but the clerical civil servants. So Saturday afternoons, football in the Winter Park and so forth, and we carry on there. So feeling that this thing did not seem to have any future, and at that time, Frederick Joseph, who was in the DAWU, and I were associates and friends. His wife was a school teacher and so forth. And so I began speaking to him about, well, what is all of this trade union thing about? Because we had registered the CSA as a trade union. It had existed for several years before as what they referred to then as a staff association. So I said, well, what is the difference between a trade union and a staff association? What is the difference between a secretary and a general secretary? And what is this and what is that? So we did a little bit of tutoring there. Frederick Joseph was a senior trade unionist at the time. People like Daryl Lawrence was in the Dominica trade union, and Zabaka and others were in the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union. And I came to the conclusion, look, the only way this thing can work is if the union becomes larger and could actually represent, instead of just writing letters, platitudes and so on. And if the establishment wished to get back in touch with you, then that happened. So I discussed with the executive that, look, we have to go on a recruitment drive. And since a lot of the members of the executive were senior civil servants, so they decided that, well, look, if I wish to go on a recruitment drive, then I'd have to do it on my own time and so on. So I agreed, and with some of the younger members of the executive, we went on a recruitment drive from office to office and so forth. And when the union had received a certain size in terms of membership, we began to ask ourselves, well, how could we expand further? And since the teachers' union existed, but was like we had been, I spoke with members of the executive of the teachers' union and so forth, and they agreed, well, look, it would be better for the teachers if we had a bigger public service union. And it was decided that the teachers' union would dissolve itself, and teachers would become members of the Civil Service Association. And having done that, after some negotiations and so forth, I, with the leaders of the teachers' union, went on a recruitment campaign to every school in Dominica. So over a period of about, I would say, 6 years, bringing us into the early 70s, we had consolidated the union. We had what we call branches, the teaching branch, the nursing branch, the general services branch, and so forth. And we had given the union some strength and so forth.
And finance?
Yes, we had increased I can't remember what the first increase was, but perhaps the $5 a month. And so I believe by then we had to find another location for the union. I think we were located on King George V Street in what was Masterville's house, Masterville Joseph, the photographer of those days. And then in 1973, with LeBlanc as chief minister and things of that nature, a situation arose at DBS. Jeff Charles was the general manager of DBS, and people like Alvin Knight and all of these people working there. Daniel Corderon was a program director, and he had a Saturday program, I think they called Youth Tempo or Teenage Tempo. And that was a sort of a call-in program, and he went by the sobriquet Papa D. And young people would call in, and some of the contributions were considered to be over the top. Yeah, so the unions had then established a committee among themselves. That is to say, then you had the DTU, the WAWU and the DAWU, and the CSA. And we met on a probably monthly basis with the private sector organizations, the Dominica Employers Federation, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Hotel Association. So we call that the group of 7, 4 trade unions and 3 private sector. And so we met to sort of review the economic, well, no, because this was both employers and employees. But we looked at the economic situation and the labor industrial relations climate and things of that nature. And we met and we found it useful. So we were having this meeting one Saturday morning. We met on Saturdays, probably last Saturday in the month. Some DBS staff come across into the meeting and decided, well, look, they had transferred Daniel Corderon from DBS as program manager, and they were sending him to the sixth form college as a clerk and so forth. And they found that that was wrong, so they had walked off the job. No, we had not, the union had not been involved at all. They walked off the job. So I decided, well, look, I mean, we have to stand before our members at DBS. And so
DBS was part of the CSA?
Yes, most of the statutory boards and so on. But at that time, DBS was part of the civil service of the Prime Minister's office.
Yes.
At that time and so on. So we hurriedly called an executive committee meeting and decided that we would support the DBS and so forth, and called the rest of the civil service to stand with us, to stand with DBS. So we had a strike in 1973. Having gone on strike, we seek to engage the Prime Minister's office with regards to what had happened. The Premier's office with regards to what had happened with the program director and so on. So I remember we had a meeting in the Prime Minister's office, and DBS, because not everybody had gone on strike. So there was a recording of this. So I said, well, what's going on? If you're recording, then we have to have our own recording as well. He says, no, this is just for insurance, so as to ensure that there's an accurate record of what it. No, in this, I grew up in a grammar school, so you're very polite.
Yes.
To people who were in senior positions. So Mr. LeBlanc began to hector and so on, and whatever the case would be. And having said, look, this was not for publication, by the time we stepped outside on the 1 o'clock news, here is LeBlanc sort of reading the Riot Act to Charles Savarin. The fellow said, boy, the headmaster, this and the Prime Minister did, and so on.
And you were still a teacher at the time?
Yes. Yes, in 73. So we decided, well, look, I mean, the union is looking very bad. This thing is not very good. So we tried to intensify the strike. Then there were a couple media people and who would come to me and ask me questions. And so I would tell them what was happening. They would record it, and then they would go to LeBlanc. Here's what Charles Savarin said. So LeBlanc would respond, and they would come back and so on. And so, to a very large extent, the media was driving the narrative by provoking a comment and then getting a response, and kept this thing going because they sold the footage to Reuters and these things and so on. And you got paid by column inches and all those kind of things and minutes on the air. So this thing kept to the point where a state of emergency was declared, and the leaders of the public, myself, Sims was assistant secretary, And the president of, since this thing happened, when we were having this meeting, Zaboka pledged 110% support from the Waterfront and Allied Workers Union, the Dominica Trade Union pledged its support and so forth. So this thing had the makings of a national strike. So then the Premier declared a state of emergency, claimed that there was, this speech is there recorded, that they had gone into the woods and they had found 2 rounds of ammunition and so on. And then now I was placed under house arrest, as was Sims and Zaboka. And we took the matter to court, and the court struck down the house arrest thing and so forth. So having been a couple of weeks.
House arrest, police at your door?
Yes. And the terms that you're not to enter any government building, you cannot leave your house without telling the police where you're going, you cannot have more than so many people in your house at the same time, and so on. So that went on for a few days. We went to court, the court struck it down. So I went to Portsmouth to see my parents, who were alive at the time, and so on. And while I was there, I heard on the news that, in fact, the government had amended the order and reimposed house arrest. So I said to my parents, look, I'm going back to Roseau because I'm sure police are coming down. And there's nothing more they would like than to come with siren, blazing, grab and so on. So I'm going down, I'm sure I will meet them. I met them just between Beosh and Collyhoo. So I said, look guys, I know where you're going. I'm just coming down to Roseau, so you can either follow me or I'll follow you. Not a problem. So I drove in the police were driving behind me, and I went back to my home, and then the state of emergency lapsed, and therefore the detention lapsed. But what it did do is that it taught me and the union that you can't just go on strike. This was not a strike that was planned. We decided to support the DBS staff that had gone on strike. And so when we had talks with the permanent secretaries and so on, they said, well, look, well, this was an illegal strike and so on. And we had to concede because the Industrial Relations Act required to give notice, to declare a dispute, and to give the minister and the Labour Department time to see whether there's a way out. We didn't do any of that. We just went on strike. So we lost 22 days' pay, all the strikers. And so we learned a lesson. I certainly learned a lesson. And I don't think I had an unsuccessful strike after that, because I never called a strike without giving notice, without proper planning, without all of the things that needed to be done to ensure that strikes were successful.
So what's your first strike after that?
We had a strike. We, first of all, had negotiations for salary revision. That was the first time we submitted a real trade union now negotiations. And that was in '74, after the DBS situation. We came to an agreement in December of '74. I remember quite clearly in the negotiations, LeBlanc saying, well, look, he will pay in December. So when December came and went, and I asked, but he says, well, I said December, I didn't say December, what year? So he said, all right. So 1975, the whole of '75 passed, and we're trying to get this agreement implemented and so forth. So when '76 came around, we decided we're going to serve notice that if we do not get the new salaries implemented, then we would go on strike for no matter how long it took to get this matter implemented. So in 1976, we went on strike. That strike, that is the famous 47-day strike. It's not, a lot of people think in '79. That was famous for the 7-day strike. And at the end of that, the government conceded that they would implement in June going forward, but that the 2 years and 6 months back pay from 1974, that they would pay in the following year. So we said, fine. We had the new salaries in June and went up. When 77 came around, there was no implementation. So we went on strike a second time for the implementation of the back pay. And that strike, I think, lasted for 22 days. And then the government agreed to pay and all sorts of things, about bonds and things of that nature and so on. Eventually that was done. And we had little disputes with Dowasco, whom we represented, with Roseau City Council, whom we represented, with the statutory boards, Portsmouth Town Council, and all of that. But no major confrontation until 1979. Now, in the implementation of the back pay in 77, we had given an undertaking that we would not make an application for salaries in 77 because the life of a collective agreement is 3 years under the law. And if the last revision was in 74, then 77, a new agreement. But we agreed we would not, so in 78, we made an application. And the negotiations moved on very slowly. And eventually we had an agreement signed, but without implementation. No, the agreement was not signed. We had an agreement, but it wasn't signed. So in 79, we served notice that we would go on strike to conclude the agreement and to have it enforced. And having served notice, the government of Patrick John responded by introducing an amendment to the Industrial Relations Act and an amendment to the Slander and Libel Ordinance, because by then the government was coming under severe criticism in the press, in the media, the Chronicle, and so forth. So the amendment to the Industrial Relations Act made it an offense to go on strike in the public service, and made it an offense for anybody to support civil servants who on strike in any way at all. So if you give them, because in 77 and 76 there had been tremendous national support. People brought provisions and other things to us at the Goodwill Parish Hall, where we met on a regular basis during the strike. So recognizing the popular support that the union had, the government decided that that was not going to happen. So anybody who gave support to striking civil servants was themselves guilty of an offense and could be charged and fined. And then because there had been criticism in the media, the amendment to the Libel and Slander Ordinance made it an offense to publish a criticism of the government, particularly if it were done anonymously. And it was an offense if you failed to, you the media, to declare to the authorities who this anonymous contributor was. And the penalty for that was that the newspapers could be seized, the press could be seized, the people who sold the newspaper on the side of the road were guilty of an offense, and the shops and the partners that had papers, they too were guilty of an offense. So the private sector saw this amendment to the Slander and Libel Ordinance as an attack on the fundamental freedoms of freedom of expression, and the media was owned by some private sector people. It had been a Catholic, the Chronicle had been, but they had reformed themselves, and I think management consultants, which was a private sector thing, had taken control. So the private sector felt that this was an attack on them. All the unions felt that that was an attack on them. And of course, under that persons participating, that is to say the executives of the unions who called the strike, were themselves guilty of an offense and could be sent to jail and whatever the case may be. So we served notice of strike in early May. So the law requires you to give 21 days notice. So this was coming to an end. And on the eve of that now, the law was going to be passed. Parliament had been summoned. So we summoned the meeting on the 28th. And having summoned the meeting, the government summoned its own party supporters to a meeting. Now they go to the parish hall. So while we were meeting, in a public meeting on the trade union steps, the government and its party is meeting at the Goodwill Parish Hall. And the news came to us that there was going to be a state of emergency, that there was going to be a prohibition of any kind of demonstration, because we decided that we were going to demonstrate outside of the parliament to prevent the passage of that law. And so that was, so we, having heard that there was going to be a state of emergency, we put the matter to the public meeting, well, are we going to demonstrate tomorrow or not? And I think Zaboka, as chairman of the meeting and so on, and therefore they said we're going to demonstrate and so on. So then I remember saying, well, look, no sticks, no stones, no bottles, nothing that we can consider an offensive weapon. A handkerchief, a wash rag, a body towel, or whatever the case may be, because there's going to be tear gas. So soak it in water, put it over your face to protect yourself and so on. And we all decided we were going to demonstrate outside on the 29th of May. So thousands, in fact, the report says that this was the largest gathering of Dominicans other than the Night of Independence in '78. So thousands of people out there, shops closed and so on to let their, because they considered themselves to be on the attack as well. So everybody was out there. And then the police, the defense force, came in with guns and tear gas and so forth, and began, and the police who had been maintaining order were caught unaware. So police and demonstrators started to run from tear gas. And then stones, people began to be thrown at the defense force.
Were you in the crowd?
I was in the crowd and ran with everybody else. I went to what was then the Roosevelt School, which is now part of the Windsor Park forecourt.
Yes.
There was a rubble wall. I think there's still a rubble wall there. I think part of the rubble wall is still there. So in looking towards the defense force, who've now begun to fire live rounds and so on, I am seeing a rifle pointed straight at me. If you've never had the sensation of looking down the barrel of a gun, it's difficult to explain. It looks very large. So I dropped like a stone behind this rubble wall, and then it began to rain. So when it began to rain, we says, look, let us leave there and let us go down to the parish hall. We will assemble at the parish hall, and therefore the confrontation between the defense. But in the meantime, one person had been killed, and 11 others had been injured and had been taken to the hospital and so on, including Brother Jermaine, who was the principal of the St. Mary's Academy. So we went down there, and it was resolved, well, look, since, in fact, the government has fired at the people, killed people in the streets, maimed others, that we would remain on strike, because we had not been on strike. In fact, we decided to go on strike in reaction to the defense force. We had served notice. The strike would have taken effect on the 31st of May. But now on the 29th of May, we resolved, well, we would strike in reaction to the actions of the defense force. And we went on strike. State of emergency was, in fact, declared on the 29th. We remained on strike, and then ministers of government began submitting their resignation. I think the first person to resign was Oliver Seraphim. He was Minister for Agriculture, and other ministers began to resign one by one, one by one. Until you had a situation where you didn't have a government, but you had members of parliament. Nobody resigned from parliament. They resigned from the government. So we are meeting, and the suggestion was made, well, look, this thing is bigger than the trade unions. So we have to bring in the private sector, other political voices in, and that is how the Committee for National Salvation was established. And as the General Secretary of the Civil Service Association, as the chairman of the Joint Trade Union Committee, I was then elected chairman of the Committee for National Salvation, and Eugenia Charles was elected secretary, and there was a committee of about 15 or 16 persons, all of the various groups, MND, whatever, all of the trade unions and groups were represented in this Committee for National Salvation. And then the committee decided, well, look, we have to try to manage this thing so that it doesn't get out of hand. In the meantime, groups of, and I can call their names, individuals, including people like Afi Mate and Bernard Wilshire and so on, decided that, look, we should have a coup and so on. And came up with a list of people who would form the transitional government. And my name is on that list, Charles Maynard's name and this kind of thing. So I said to other guys, I said in particular to Bernard Wilshire, I said, but I am not being a part of any coup. If you guys want to go and have your coup, you can have your coup, but after you have your coup, you will have to deal with the trade unions because we are not part of it. So Bernard Wilson says to me, you're talking like an ayatollah. You've not even consulted the executive or anybody else, you're just saying this and so on or whatever. And that's where the name ayatollah came from. From there. So anyhow, this coup idea fell by the wayside. And because I said, well, look, my rights to walk the street is enshrined in the Constitution. I am not surrendering that to you or to anybody else. So nobody can tell me when I can walk in the streets or where I can go. That is enshrined in the Constitution. And Wilshire said to me, the Constitution is not worth the paper it is written on. Wow. So I said, well, that is to you, but not to me. So we decided, well, Eugenia was the leader of the opposition and part of the parliament. So we decided, look, the way to work ourselves out of this thing is for the parliament to have a vote of no confidence in the government, particularly in Patrick John, and if that succeeded, then we would identify somebody to become interim prime minister. And Eugenia said that she doesn't want to be interim prime minister. She will only become prime minister when she's voted in as prime minister. And she suggested that since there were probably no set of circumstances, even the circumstances that we were in, under which the Labour Party parliamentarians would support a Freedom Party person to be prime minister, that we should identify a Labour Party member of parliament to be appointed. So we said, well, look, since Seraphim was the first person to resign, we would ask Seraphim to be prime minister. And we sent envoys to speak to Seraphim, and he accepted to be prime minister. So then the parliament met. There was this motion of no confidence. I think that was put forward by Eustace Francis, an elected member for Roseau South in the Labour Party, and supported by a majority of the members, and they also decided that they would support Oliver Seraphim to be interim prime minister. And then the first job now was to get a president, because the president, Degazon, had fled the state. And therefore, Eugenia spoke to Patrick, and they agreed that Generamo could be, because as the Constitution says that if the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister agree, then that fact is announced. You don't have a vote on an election in that sense.
But where was OJ?
In Parliament,
Uh-huh.
as a member of Parliament.
Yes. Okay.
And so the first job of the interim president was to appoint
The interim prime
the
minister.
interim prime minister. And so that was done, and OJ entered upon his. Then the other thing that was also part of the arrangement was that all of the senators would resign. And the Committee for National Salvation would recommend 9 senators, which the leader of the opposition would recommend 4, and the Prime Minister OJ would recommend 5, and the president would appoint. And therefore, with all of the elected members and the new senators, you now have a new parliament and a new government, a new interim government. The whole idea was that the interim government would be in office for 6 months, and then you'd have general elections. But a few months into this interim government, Michael Douglas says that the Constitution makes no provisions for interim government or interim prime minister. You're either prime minister or you're not. So that went into OJ's head. And the 6 months approached, and there was no move towards elections.
By that time you had Hurricane David.
Later, in August,
Yes.
79. So during the interim government,
Yes.
so we then, I think they sent Brian Alleyne, Afi Mate was Minister for Agriculture in the interim government, and others, to some meeting, I think in Grenada. Grenada had had their revolution, and Maurice Bishop. And there were parties to some declaration about the power comes from the barrel of a gun, and those who oppose will feel the full weight of the revolution, and so on. So I'm still chairman of the Committee for National Salvation doing that. So I said, well, look, but there's no mandate for us to take any such thing. So we decided that we would go on strike to bring on the government again. But then on further reflection, we decided, well, look, it's just 6 more months to go. So let the government run its thing. And we can't put the country through that trauma that we went through in May and June. So the government, and then Oliver Seraphine, recognizing this instability, decided that he was going to change no, not the cabinet, but he was going to change the senators that he had recommended, fellows like Brian Alleyne, Charles Maynard, and so on. Now, I had been appointed on the recommendation of the leader of the opposition. So Oliver Seraphine could not, but he had. So the question always arose as to whether he had dismissed Maynard or whether Maynard had resigned as a senator, and the same thing for Brian Alleyne and so on. And then, so the interim government continued. Then we had Hurricane David in 1979, and the whole country was thrown into chaos. And the Committee for National Salvation rallied again to seek to manage the thing, to set up a liaison with aid agencies and things of that nature. And then we came to the election in 1980. And in that election, there were something like 5 parties. There were 3 Labour parties. There was the Movement for a New Dominica. There was the Freedom Party, and so on. And as a result of that, the Freedom Party got 18 of the 21 seats and formed the government.
Did you run that election?
I ran in that election in Portsmouth and lost. That was the second time I contested the election. I first contested as an independent in 75 in Portsmouth and lost. And I contested as a member of the Freedom Party in 1980.
How did you do in that election? Close?
The 75 was the best as an independent.
Okay.
Because Portsmouth has a sort of a negative attitude towards the Freedom Party and its predecessor, the Dominica United People's Party. And that has to do with Frank Barron and things of that nature, and so on, which is another story. So the Freedom Party formed the government. The junior Charles was the Prime Minister. She had made a statement in Portsmouth that if the Freedom Party wins, that Charles Savarin would be appointed a minister in a government. On the night of the election, with 18 seats, she says, you know, Savarin, I remember what I said in Portsmouth, but I never expected that we would get so many seats, and the people who won want to be ministers. I told the Prime Minister, form your cabinet as you see fit. I'm not looking for a job. I have a job.
You were at the CSA.
I was at the CSA, and therefore you proceed to. So I was not part of the cabinet. Then 2 years later, a situation arose, and I was attending a CPSA meeting in St. Vincent. I got a call from Eugenia Charles, and she says, you know, Savarin, I want you to join the cabinet. I'm going to fire that. So we talked about it. I says, well, look, PM, I can't give you an answer now. When I come back home, I will discuss with the executive. And if they have no objection, then I'll be willing to accept. Kim McPhillips was very happy. He says, well, at least we have somebody in the cabinet that we can talk to and so on. And that began another phase of my life. As,
so you could leave the civil service?
Yes, I resigned. Resigned as I had been made a member for life after, I think, after the '79 strike, or at some point in that and so on. So I resigned as General Secretary and took up the appointment as a minister in the office of the Prime Minister, sort of minister without portfolio, minister of state, whatever you call it. And so there began this a real political career, so to speak.
So, Minister of, I think you were responsible for trade.
In the Prime Minister's office, because there was, yes, for trade, industry, and tourism.
Yes.
So
how long did that first stint as a minister last?
About 2.5 years, until the election of 1985.
You contested again?
I contested again and lost again.
In Portsmouth?
In Portsmouth,
yes.
Because I always felt that there was a special contribution I could make to the development of Portsmouth, regardless as to whether I was part of the government. If I was part of the parliament, I think I felt that I would have had a mandate from the people, and that there was a distinct contribution that I could make. And although it had been suggested that perhaps I could go up in Rosa North, I could go up at Soufriere, Scott's Head, and so on, I said no. I go to Portsmouth. That is
where my neighbor.
No, my best results were in '75.
Yes.
In fact, I stood a very good chance of winning in '75, but two things happened. One, there was a massive Labour Party motorcade which came through on the weekend before the election, and people began to think, well, the Labour Party win already. And then Michael Douglas, again just 2 weeks before the election, says, Charles Savarin, and his expression was, Charles Savarin not no patched independent. Charles Savarin is Freedom Party in smart. And of course, I told you about the antipathy. Yeah. So having been identified and labeled and branded, then things began to change. Yes. So although I won in 2 of the 3 polling districts, that is to say, I won in what we refer to as Portsmouth Flat. I won in Zikak. But in Granville, the overwhelming support for Mike and the Labour Party wiped out the gains that I had made in Portsmouth and so on. So, but so that was the situation that arose.
So after you've lost in '85, do you return to cabinet?
No. The Eugenia decided, well, look, she would appoint me as ambassador to Brussels. And I remember there was a little hiatus, like now, where announcements have been made of ambassadors being appointed, and some months have passed and they have not taken up the appointment. So people began to say, well, what is happening? Because so long they said that Savarin was saying, and how come? Well, no, so these are mostly Savarin people who felt that maybe the government was pulling a fast one. But I never felt so. I understand that things have to take their own time. There is a question of agreement, which is not no for no. It's not like going by Astafan and buying something off the shelf. You apply to the government, they consider your candidate, and in their own time they indicate yes or no, and then the arrangements have to be made, because you cannot begin to make arrangements if you're not sure that the person is going to be accepted by the receiving government. So I was aware that these things take their time, but also a little bit happy that people were stirring up. Yeah, of course, and so on. So eventually I went off first to the United Kingdom as Minister Counselor in the High Commission there, learn the ropes and so on. From there I went to Germany to do a stint in protocol and ambassadorial responsibilities and so forth. And then from Germany I came back home, and then I went to Brussels. So by that time, it was in 1986, and I remained there for 7 years, returning to Dominica in 93, and took up an appointment as the manager of the NDC.
Just appointed, no application?
No, well, while I was in Brussels, Maynard and Brian Allen called me and says, well, look, you know, you're coming back home. And we thought that the opening which we had was that of general manager of the NDC. So I sort of him and her, he says, well, look, I mean, the salary there is even better than that of a minister, you know, and so on, and you have a car, and you have a this, and you have a that, and so on. But I'm coming home because that decision has been taken, and so forth. So I said, okay, and so on. So I came back home. And then the little politics began to play and so on, and Maynard began to do his little Maynard thing.
He was your boss at the time, Minister of Tourism.
But I was, he was not my boss, because I was, no, I was the former minister, I was the former ambassador, so I am not at NDC. Okay. I am a candidate. Okay. So then, he tells me that I have to do an interview. So I said to the Prime Minister, Eugene, I said, look, Maynard is talking. What is all of this interview thing about? I was offered this job, and now I'm being told about an interview. He says, look, Savarin, if the minister wants you to do an interview, do an interview. So I went to an interview. There's the board and so forth. And the first question the chairman of the board asked me is, well, Mr. Savarin, why do you want to be chairman, the manager of the NDC? I said, I don't want to be manager of the NDC. I didn't apply to be manager. I was offered the job of manager of the NDC.
Who was the chairman?
I believe the chairman was Lawrence, what is his name now, who is lives in the valley, and married to this Fingal girl. What Lawrence is he? Milton Lawrence, Milton. And so Milton is very embarrassed. He says, well, look, I don't feel well, I should be interviewing Mr. Savarin. Probably Mr. Savarin should be interviewing me. And then I was asked a question about the fact that they understand that I will not take instructions from the minister. And so I said, I don't know where you got that from. But I will not take instructions from everybody. I just need to know who I am to take instructions from. So if I am to take instructions from the minister, that is fine. If I am to take instructions from the board, that is also fine. If I am to take instructions from the permanent secretary, that is also fine. Permanent secretary is Erwin Larrock at the time. But I will not take instructions from everybody. I need to know who I am to take instructions from. I said, furthermore, I understand that the minister is in the habit of calling members of staff and giving them instructions. If I'm the general manager, that will stop. The minister will not call my staff and give them instructions. If the minister wants any information or service, he will call me. And I will assign a member of staff to do whatever it is the minister wants. So then Mr. Henderson, who has since parted, he used to be an agriculturist. I think it was Dr. Henderson.
Dr. Thomas Henderson.
Thomas Henderson. He says, Mr. Savarin, if you I must first of all tell you quite clearly, I was one of those who was skeptical about your suitability for the job. But if you are as prepared for the job as you are for the interview, I have no reservations. and so that is how I became general manager of the NDC.
How long did you stay in Nigeria?
I stayed until the election that would have been in 95 election, which I won.
Yes. So how did you?
And then now I resigned subsequent to nomination. I'm not 100% sure if it is subsequent to the election, but I campaigned, took leave and campaigned and all of that type of stuff and so on, because I was aware that people at DBS had gone up for election, and people at Roseau City Council had gone up for election. Thomas Baptiste had gone up for election. Ferdinand Frampton had gone up for election. Luke Corriette had gone, and actually sat, I think, Bowers, and actually sat in Parliament as employees of statutory boards. So I didn't see that there was any difference between my being the general manager there and general manager at DBS and other places. So, but having won, I didn't think that you could do both, that you could, so I resigned. I think I must have resigned after the results and so on. Anyhow, they challenged my election and said I was a civil servant. And therefore, the law provides you cannot be a civil servant and a member of parliament, which is not the same thing as president. President is you cannot hold an office of emolument. It doesn't matter whether it is in the public service or in the private sector. But a member of parliament, you can be employed, you can run your office, you can, but you cannot be an employee of the government, a civil servant. So that went to court. And the High Court ruled in favor of the application, that I was in fact disqualified. And I know that the judge was. But the judge, in giving his verdict, says it doesn't matter what he decides, he knows it will not end here and that it will go to the Court of Appeal. And clearly the judge was taking a position that, look, the election was over, the UWP had won. So he didn't want, as it were, to rule against the UWP. So he ruled against me, but he did not award what Prevost wanted, that was to be declared the winner, because he had lost.
Yes.
So then he said that there should be an election in so many days, I can't remember how many days. So, but we appealed. And the Court of Appeal found that the judge and both the lawyers for the appellant and the respondent didn't know what they were talking about. They didn't understand the law. Because what the law says, that you are prohibited from participating or being elected to parliament if you are in the employ of the government in a civil capacity.
Yes.
So the whole, what is the difference with being employed, being in the employment of the government and being in the employment of the government in a civil capacity? So the appeal judge says, look, every word in the law has a specific meaning. So in a civil capacity, it's not just flowery language. You want to use words, you have more space, so you want to fill up the page. What is the meaning of in a civil capacity? And the judge found that I was not employed in a civil capacity. And he went on to explain what a civil capacity means, that you're part of the central administration of the state, which is usually listed in the United Kingdom as the civil list, and in Dominica as the establishment list, which is subject to the appointment by the Public Service Commission. But since my post as NDC was not on the establishment list, I was not appointed by the Public Service Commission or any commission, therefore I was not in the employ of the government in a civil capacity, and therefore I was properly elected.
So,
and served my term as...
Did you have to get all your back pay and that sort of thing? as a partner because you were out for
It was decided within a month or two.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
How did you become candidate for Roseau?
Well, I had always felt, having lost in Portsmouth 3 times, I was not going to go back for election in Portsmouth. And Eugenia having decided that she would not lead the party, nor would she contest, I considered myself to be the logical candidate for Portsmouth, for
Roseau.
Roseau. But when I came back, I was not invited to run. Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing about all sorts of names of persons who are being considered, including Dr. Thomas, Peters, Dr. Peters, and so on. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Peters came to my home and he says to me, "Where are you running?" I said, "I don't know, I have not," and so on. So he says, "Well, you know, they've approached me to run in Roseau Central." I said, "Well, I thought I was going to run in Roseau Central," but he says, "Well..."
But why did you think you were going to run in Roseau Central?
Because I had, in fact, I thought I was the best known person in the Freedom Party in Roseau. And I had lived in Roseau since I came to grammar school in 1956, and I knew all of the co-eds in the place and so on, and whatever the case may be. So when I began to hear all sorts of names, including Grell and Dr. Peters and so on, I decided, look, that is not going to. So I decided to launch a petition in Roseau Central for Charles Savarin for Roseau Central. And the petition reached 700 names and climbing. So Brian Allen comes to me and he tells me he understands that I launched a petition. And I said, yes. He says, well, boy, you've nailed your coffin. You know Eugenia Charles. You've never agreed that she thinks to challenge. And I said, well, remember, Roseau Central was not willed to Eugenia Charles by J.B. Charles, eh?
You said that?
But, you mean, yeah, man. So the petition is still out. I mean, the Freedomites in Roseau Central are signing up, I mean, like hot bread. So when the petition reached, I think it was 600 and something going there, somebody came to me and said, Eugenia Charles says that, look, I have to understand that it haven't got bourgeois in Roseau again. And therefore, you know, by wanting to run, I said, but who is a bourgeois? Am I a bourgeois? And I said, well, in any case, Eugenia Charles has been representing Roseau for 20 years. If it hasn't got bourgeois in Roseau, she should be ashamed. So when the petition reached 700, somebody came to tell me that Eugenia wants to sing. Okay. So I went. She had a couple of people there and so on. She said, yes, at the office in Roseau, in the Old Street. She says, well, you know, Savarin, I was thinking, Eugenia Charles, you know, that perhaps you should be the candidate. Nothing about petition and so on, whatever. So I said, well, I wouldn't mind. I think that I could give it a shot, and I think I have a good chance of winning, and so on. And that's how I became the candidate for Roseau Central.
What was your relationship with Eugene?
Very good. Very good. In fact, while we were, because minister's salary were always very pitiful, and so on. So Maynard and Brian met with me at the back of the Public Works, and he says, you know, I think Eugenia, we used to meet at Eugenia's home on a Saturday, and said to me, well, why don't you talk to Eugenia about minister's salary? I said, well, why don't you talk to Eugenia about minister's salary? And he says, well, you know, I mean, you have a good relationship with Eugenia and so on about that. So, okay. Went to the next meeting. I said, you know, Prime Minister, this salaries that ministers, I'm a minister, are getting. I mean, that's pitiful, you know, and so on. So Eugenia Charles is saying, that damn nonsense. I mean, you guys say I'm not a politician, but you all do not understand that what timing and so on, whatever. Me and I say, we told him so. told him so.
After they had sent you.
Yes, I told him so.
So what happened with salaries?
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened.
Nothing happened. The thing died a death. So type of stuff.
But let's inject something here. I've heard you were sent to Brussels because she was afraid of you.
Well, I've heard that. I've never. The closest that you could say that we came to discussing that was when the leadership of the party came up, and she came to Brussels and she said, Savarin, I don't see anybody in the cabinet that could replace me as prime minister and leader of the party. I says, but I'm thinking maybe Alan Carbon. So I said, Prime Minister Alan Carbon cannot lead the party. And I said, Alan Carbon is my friend. I've known Alan Carbon long before Freedom Party. Alan Carbon was working at Public Works. He was the shop steward of the CSA, which means we had this relationship. What is more, I've known Alan Carbon in Capuchin, his mother, his father, his grandparents, and so on. My parents know his parents and all of that. So we've been. So I have nothing against Alan Carbon, but he cannot do it, the Prime Minister. Oh, you think so? No, I mean, whenever he's acting Prime Minister, he's the only person who does the work on my desk. When the others are there, come back, I meet everything on my desk and so on. So I said, well, Prime Minister, Alan Carbon is acting for you. Nobody will challenge him. To challenge him is to challenge you. You're the Prime Minister, not he. But if he's on his own, that's a different matter. And I don't think, first of all, I do not believe that the council will elect him. He doesn't have that relationship with the council. And so on. So then after that discussion, a little committee was formed down here, and they told me, well, look, you should join the campaign for, so I came down on holidays and entered the contest and went into the contest as an election, like the primaries in the United States. So Maynard and Brian began to say that I have changed the climate for the election because this thing was going on nicely and now they have all of this thing and so on. So I told Maynard, look, Charles, in looking at this thing, why don't you just bow out of the race? You're not going to win, and what is more, you're going to be the first to drop out because I think Alan Carbon and Brian will get more than you. And so on. He says, oh, no, on the contrary, this and so on and so on. I said, okay. So I went to Dr. Brian, told Brian the same thing, that he should drop out too. And then Brian and Maynard said, well, look, Brian says he'd be happy to serve in a cabinet led by Maynard and Maynard. So I say to Alan Carbon, look, Maynard and Brian are working together. We should work together. But he knows Eugenia Charles, and so he feels he can win. So a couple, he took a front to this. I said, look, Alan, we've known each other long before politics. So let us agree we will never discuss this thing again. You may say something which will annoy me, and I may respond, or I may say something which would annoy you. So let us agree we will never discuss this matter again. And so we left it there, kept our relationship intact, and I am doing my stuff. Then on the eve of the election, I go to the East, to Conrad Cyrus's place where the delegates from the East were meeting. And I discussed with them, told them what my vision was for thing and so on. And he says, well, look, before you entered the race, we had sort of agreed we would support Brian Alleyne, but having listened to you, we think we can support you. But we still feel a certain allegiance to Brian. So if you can commit to us that you'd make Brian deputy political leader, and so on. I says, well, I can't give you that commitment because the Constitution makes no provisions for deputy political leader. But if I become the leader of the party, and if there is a proposal to create the post of deputy political leader, I would support that proposal. And if the council agrees to create the post, then I would support Brian Allen for deputy. But we first have to create the post. Fella said, well, that's good enough for us. So I left, came back down. In my absence, Swanson Carbon, Alvin Knight, Dermot Southwell, and I believe Brian and Maynard goes up to the east. And so on. The guys are telling them, well, you know, they are thinking of supporting Charles Savarin and so on. So Swanson Cabon make the famous statement, well, he cannot tell Brian and Maynard what to do. But if he is in their place, a member of cabinet, and the party council elects an outsider to be political leader, he would resign. Now the party has a one-seat majority, 11 seats in parliament. So if anybody resigns, the party falls and so on. And Eugenia Charles had already said she's not losing the government by election. Anybody resigns, she dissolve the house and everybody fend for themselves. So we come to the election, and I feel the wind is in my sails and all of that. We had agreed as the conditions for the election that we will not go the first past the post, but by an elimination process, because the first past the post, if you get the most votes, you win. The elimination, you must get 50% plus one. So I said, fine. Then we address to sort of give you a vision for the party and all of that. So when it comes to chairman, Dermot Southwell says, well, you know, Brian and Maynard says that they don't think it's necessary to address the thing. I says, well, for me, that is the condition we agreed to. So if they don't want, that is their business, but I will still address the convention and so on. Then the ballots. First ballot may not drop out. I get the most votes. Brian Allen is second. Allen Cabon is third. And Maynard is a distant fourth. Second ballot. Three of us. On the second ballot, Brian Allen gets more votes than me, but he doesn't get 50%. What has happened is that most, if not all, of Maynard's vote has gone to Brian Allen, so he's supplanted me, but still doesn't have 50%. So Allen Cabon drops out. Third ballot, Brian gets the 50% and so forth. But there's one spoiled ballot. So everybody look at Eugenia Charles. They decide, because Allen Cabon has been eliminated,
Yes.
she spoiled the ballot. So anyhow, Brian is elected. A lot of people who gathered outside the thing when they heard Brian is elected, some people began to cry, some people began to say choops, some people, because as far as they're concerned, Charles Savarin should have been elected the leader of the party. So DBS comes in and does the usual, throw the microphone in people's throats, and they speak to Eugenia. And Eugenia says, you know, I still think Allen Cabon would have been the best person to be leader, because Brian is a lazy person.
She said that.
She said that. She said that. And then Brian Allen, no, from my point of view, compounded the thing by, went to DBS. He didn't take on Eugenia, but he took on one of the main supporters of the party in terms of financial contribution, and he makes a statement to the effect, well, people that think that because they make a contribution to the party that they can tell the party what to do, he has news for them. And under his watch, that will not be the case. And he's calling all members of the party to make their contribution, $1, $5, whatever the case, and so on. So that person calls me. And he says, I got Brian Allen's message. My money is not making holes in my pocket. I want to see how much money he's going to get, $1 and $5 at a time. So the election, well, Eugenia continued as prime minister, and then she decided, well, because remember her position was that neither Brian nor Maynard would succeed her. So she would not appoint Brian to act prime minister in her absence. She says, well, Brian has too much work to do to prepare the party for election. So at one point in time, at Goodwill. What is his name? Alan Guy is chairman of the party, and Alan Guy is chairing a meeting of the council as acting prime minister. And Asinal, who is a firm and fervent supporter of Brian Allen, stands up in the council and says he doesn't understand what Eugenia is doing. She's not there, that's why I think it's acting. The people elect Brian Allen as political leader, designate and so on. And she, instead of appointing Brian to act, she appointing all Tebe, Alan Guy is there, to act prime minister. So after the meeting, Alan Guy says nothing. He says, that kind of quietness. But Alan Guy never returned to a council meeting. And in the election that followed, neither he nor anybody in his house voted. Nobody voted. I think Brian had asked Baba Dyer to go up for him, and nobody voted in that. So I am now saying to Brian, I said, look, Brian, I think you should apologize to the council and to Alan Guy. And because everybody knows that Arsenal supports you, so we will feel that he is reflecting your views on the matter, and you should make it clear that he's not speaking for you. And so Brian didn't agree with me, so he never apologized and so on. So that went on there. Then there was this by-election in the Carib territory, and we had Elvis Francis as a candidate, and I took it upon myself to go up to the Carib territory to launch a campaign, but primarily by doing indoor meetings, and sort of, my first job was a school teacher, so sort of doing lectures and so on, of all of these things, and sharing out handouts and leaflets and pamphlets and so forth. And then I go to the public meetings and I sit back and I hear guys coming out and on the platform and so on. So that is going very well. On the eve, maybe a week or so before the election, I have an indoor meeting planned for Atkinson. So I come up with all of my paraphernalia and so on. I meet the community hall closed. That's how that can be, because we know, make arrangements to have the place open and so on. So I said, okay, I turn around, then I meet Elvis Francis going down the road, and I'm going back up to Rosa. I said, Elvis, what is happening? He says, oh, well, Brian and them were here earlier, so they had a meeting there, and now they've gone down to Entwistle. I said, okay, that is good. So they asked me, you come into Entwistle? I said, well, I'm going down to Roseau, and probably when I reach there, I will decide if I'm going to come to Entwistle. But I had brought up all of these things and so on and whatnot. I can leave them with you, or I can go back to Roseau with it. Because we'd had a problem. Now, we'd always had support in Atkinson. But there was this question of water, which was a serious question in the whole Carib territory, but particularly bad in Atkinson. And the intention was to deal with the water thing, to get a certain sympathy and understanding, because we had a project for the northeast water supply, which included Marigot and the Carib territory. So I left that alone, and so on. So the election came, and we lost.
As a sitting government?
As a sitting government. And that's how Barry became PAL rep. And that is what put the wind in the sails of the United Workers' Party, so that when the general election came, they won by 1 seat. Yes. We would have lost the election, but we would have gotten more than the 5 seats we got. We would have won the Carib territory in the by-election, held it on in the general election. We would have won Vickers with Maynard Joseph, and we would have won Cottage with Allen Carbon, at the very least. So that would have been 8 minimum. Maybe it could have been 9. But so We lost the election there, and then when the results were published that we had lost, Brian Alleyne and Charles Maynard says, well, that was the best results that we could get. Because what they feared, the relation was such, they feared that if we had won and we had 12, that Eugenia would have fired one or both of them. So they were very happy, so it remained 11.
Yes. So
And she had no leeway to maneuver because they felt that they would have been fired. So he said, well, that was the best results that we could get.
You won as parliamentary representative for Roseau
Right.
in 1995 and
95 and 2000.
Let's talk about these years as parliament for
Yeah.
Roseau. Felt you did okay as parliament?
Not as much as I would have liked to do. In the first case, in 1995, we lost the government.
Yes.
So the United Workers' Party was the government, and they would do nothing that would help to boost or bolster Savarin as party rep. So that was a very challenging time. And then in 2000 now, we found ourselves in a coalition with the Labour Party, and in very difficult financial and economic situation in the country. We had to go to the IMF, we had to bring levies on people, we didn't have, and so on. And then, now I find myself walking through Roseau and people say, Savarin, where was stadium? That was because the United Workers' Party had begun a stadium, but the stadium had a lot of faults. It didn't meet international standards and so on, and they didn't have money to complete it. And then grass had begun to grow and bush, so I am the party rep, and the UWP people are referring to the Windsor Park as Jurassic Park. So everywhere you pass in Roseau, oh, Jurassic Park, but there was stadium and so on. But although I am part of the government now with the Labour Party, we don't have the money. So in 2004, after Rosie and Pierre Charles, Skerrit goes to China. And of the 4 pillar projects, the stadium is one of them. And but in 2005,
Yes.
I lost the election to Prevost. So although the stadium project continued, I was no longer the party rep. So that was one of the major things that I had wanted to do. I had also wanted to do some work in the Roseau River because I had felt, first of all, that particularly the new bridge that we had wanted to build, the design was too low and it would create a threat to the city of Roseau. And I always felt that we could dredge the Roseau River so you could use it as a recreation area from the sea up to the bend by sea breeze, by city breeze, up to the bend there. And also always wanted a housing project in Roseau because I felt that there are just too many derelict houses and empty lots in Roseau. But that takes a certain amount because it's a politically sensitive thing. Yeah, because if you, the government may have to take certain actions and may get a negative political response to people who are doing nothing with the houses that they have. They pose a danger, they're fire hazard, they house vermin and vagrants. So that is something that I've always wanted to do, and I'm still hoping will happen in Roseau. But so I didn't think that I achieved what I would have liked to achieve in Roseau as party rep.
You are still a minister of government.
Right.
You are leader of the Freedom Party.
Right.
You lost an election, but you're still back as minister.
Right.
How do you transition from freedom to labor?
Well, in the first instance, you have to understand that in 1980, for the 2000 election, Eugenia Charles had said that we should do, because after 4.5 years of the United Workers' Party, it was clear that we were on a downward slide. And Eugenia Charles had said to us that we should do whatever is within our power to ensure that the United Workers' Party is removed from office and so on. So we decided to have an accommodation with the Labour Party. And in places where I thought, as leader of the party, that we had less of a chance to win in a three-way fight, and that possibly the United Workers' Party could win, I decided to withdraw Freedom Party candidates from those fights and to support the Labour Party in those constituencies. And as a result of that, the Labour Party got 10 and we got 2. And we formed the government. Now, having formed the government, and I'm sitting in the cabinet, so is Sabroch, the executive of the Labour Party is beginning to be restless and to say, well, look, to say we have to establish our independence, which is right, as an independent party, so that we, for the next election and prepare for the next election and so on, that is right. But then they began to say, well, we should take a critical stance towards the Labour Party. I said, but we are part of the government. How can we take a critical stance? We have to be supportive of the government. There are 9 UWP constituencies. Let us consolidate ourselves in those 9 constituencies rather than seeking to be everything to everybody everywhere. And we began to have differences within the Freedom Party. And then they began to drift towards supporting the UWP, criticizing in the party thing. And so I said, look, I can't be part of that. Because I feel that this is not, to my mind, constructive. I do not see this sort of middle of the road thing cannot work. The middle of the road means that you supporting the United Workers' Party and so on. So I do not want to be any part of that. So I resigned, and I sent them a 3-page letter, which they've never published.
You still have it?
I probably have to look for it, but Boston and these guys ought to have it. I can probably look for it and find it. Pointing out all of the things where the party had fallen short, and that I could no longer be part of that particular trend that I see that they were following.
No.
I can probably find it.
No, you're going on, and you're minister. I think you're Minister of National Security.
Yes.
2013, the question of the president arises.
Yes.
At what time does Charles Savarin become candidate for president?
Well, in the first case, I had never had any ambitions to become president. I had seen myself as becoming prime minister after Eugenia Charles. And when the Freedom Party did not quite consolidate itself and so forth, then I thought, well, that wasn't going to happen. So, plus, I thought that the Labour Party, first of all, we supported Rosie to become Prime Minister. Pierre Charles was deputy when Rosie died. Pierre Charles was clearly the person to succeed him. And when Pierre Charles died, and they were discussing the question of the leadership, the Freedom Party was meeting, and the Labour Party was meeting. And somebody is saying, well, look, probably you should become Prime Minister with the support of the Labour Party. I said, look, let's be realistic in this thing. If the Freedom Party had 9 seats and the Labour Party had 2, is there any way under which we, the Freedom Party, would agree to support a Labour Party person to be president, to be Prime Minister? If we would not, why do you think that the Labour Party would? So I kept getting calls whether we have decided to support Skerrit, because at that time I had learned that Brother O had been making stirrings that he was the senior member of the Labour Party and he should be Prime Minister. And of course, Osborne did not have what it takes to be Prime Minister. So I said, look, no, we support Skerritt, and so on. And Skerritt became Prime Minister. And although he was very young, I think he embraced the Prime Ministership with both hands and grew in the position. I never had any qualms about supporting the Prime Minister. If you spoke to people who knew Rosie, he would tell you that he could depend on me more than any other member of the Labour Party, and so on. Because I am one of those who feel if you give your commitment to something, you do it. You don't have people looking back to see if you're there. Mm-hmm. If you've given your commitment, you've given your commitment. And that is the thing. And as far as I was concerned, I was committed to the government. And therefore that meant the leader of the government and things of that nature. So when the question first arose about Liverpool resigning because of health reasons, the thought crossed my mind that maybe I could succeed Liverpool. But I kept that to myself. I used to drop by Nick and have a little rum now and then and so on. I dropped by and he told me that they were considering Pershing Waldron. Pershing Waldron had been president of the Labour Party. He had gone up for election to one of the factions of the party when they had 3 factions and so on. So I said, fine, why not? So I remember going down to Portsmouth and seeing Pershing's wife and saying, Madam President. He said, huh, Madam President. And the Prime Minister talked with the bishop and the bishop says that Pershing is an ordained deacon. And under the Constitution, ordained ministers cannot either sit in Parliament or be, and so on. So that, and then this question of Eliud came up and so on and fine. And so Eliud became president. PM calls me and he tells me, look, you will have to go forward to be president. I said, if you say so, and so on. So, but we're almost out of time. I have to resign right away, and so on. So Monday morning I go to the office, I draft a letter of resignation, and I call my secretary and I ask her to type it. She says, Mrs. Everett, what happened? I said, how? But how? What is going on? So I told her that, well, the PM has asked me if I would agree to be nominated to be president. So, okay. So I go to the cabinet with my letter of resignation. I hand it in to the address to the Prime Minister. And I said, well, since I'm no longer a member of the cabinet, I have to sit down. Where are you going? Sit down and so on and whatever. And then they said, you know, you have also got to resign as a member of Parliament and so forth. I said, okay. I said, well, AG, just draft this thing, I'll sign it. So and so after a couple of pleasantries, I leave, go to my office, take my things, and I go home. And I think within a couple of days, the Parliament has to meet to receive nominations and so forth. So the amazing thing or the amusing thing is that the leader of the opposition had said about Alex's nomination, oh, it would be better if it was Savarin that they had nominated to be president and beaten up himself. So when Savarin was nominated, he said, that cannot stand. That cannot stand, and so on. But the elections took place, and
yes.
I was elected president.
How would you describe your 10 years as president?
Interesting and challenging, and totally enjoyable. Even the challenges. I think it's a privilege for anybody to serve as president of the country. And Even more so that you do not have to campaign. It's not a post that you campaign for. You don't go to the Prime Minister and say to the Prime Minister, I would like to be president. You don't go write a petition
to be president
and say you want to be president. You don't go to the street corners and so on and say you want to be president. You are invited and so on. And I think anybody who is invited to serve should consider it a privilege, particularly if you are invited by the government of the day, because it's at the end of the day. And the Constitution clearly understands that, because it says that if the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition agree, then that fact is declared to the House and the person is considered elected. I think what the Constitution anticipates is that the Prime Minister is the leader of his party, so if he nominates somebody, his party will support it. And if the leader of the opposition agree, then the party members of the opposition will also support it. So you have the whole House, just with the two agreeing. So what is the point of going through this thing of election? So the Constitution anticipates that. So if you're approached by the Prime Minister, who is only Prime Minister because he has a majority of the votes in the House, so you are almost certain to have the support of the members of the government side. So that is an immense privilege, because once you're approached by the Prime Minister, you're almost certain, even if it does go to an election, even if you do have other nominees, that you will be elected.
As president, you have had some you are the only president to preside over 3 general elections.
Yes, and all 3 of them with their own challenges.
Yes.
Particularly the previous 2, not so much the 2021, 2022, but the 2019 and the 2014. With all of this agitation about electoral reform and so on, and guys camping outside of the State House and various groups demanding to see the president and assuming that the president can postpone the election or do all of those things. That indicates the need for the president to be very level-headed, not allow himself either to be, as it were, become troubled or excited or excitable, and to be persuaded against his own better judgment as what needs to be done. And it is clear that the Constitution says that the president has to be satisfied, even where he acts in his own deliberate judgment. And like being in the employ of the government in a civil capacity, the question of being satisfied, how does the president become satisfied? Not just because he gets up in the morning. So to be satisfied that this table cannot be fixed.
Yes.
But you're not a joiner. So somebody who is a joiner has to look at it and tell you, I think you better get a new table because this table cannot be fixed.
Yes.
You cannot be satisfied that it cannot be fixed unless you have some expert advice on that. So the Constitution says that the president can postpone an election for not more than 90 days if he is satisfied that the conditions do not exist for holding an election. The conditions being that you do not have a prepared voters list, you do not have the election material, ballot boxes, ballot papers, indelible ink, returning officers, and all of these things, voting booths and all of that. Now, the only way you can know that these things are not in place is if the electoral office or the chief elections officer tells you, look, we just cannot be ready in time. Then you can be satisfied. But without that kind of advice, you cannot say that you're satisfied and you're going to postpone the election, even if the Constitution says that you can, if you are satisfied.
Yes.
And the mechanism for being satisfied is a thing that every president must understand very clearly. It's not just that, it's not if you feel, it's if you're satisfied.
You had natural disasters.
Oh, dear God, yes. We had Erica, we had Maria, we had COVID.
Yes, COVID.
And these were extremely challenging times. COVID is not over. I just came from the United States, and there are the numbers are rising again in the United States and elsewhere. And the destruction caused by Maria, in fact, I addressed this again in the United Nations. I mean, we lost some 90% of our GDP in 2015, and then 226% of our GDP in 2017, back to back.
Yes.
And then we're hit by Maria, and it is a miracle. And you have, I mean, whatever your political opinion, you have to marvel at what has been done by the government to place this country on an even keel following these two major natural disasters. And COVID, where you close down all of the revenue generating activities, and you have to give concessions to people whose businesses and tourism, people who no tourists are coming, no visitors, the ports are closed and things of that nature. To manage that takes extra dexterity. Some countries only had to deal with COVID.
Yes.
Some countries may have had to deal with one cyclone, but we had two major natural weather events plus COVID, and I think that we've done very well. We've done exceptionally well, and we've managed, and all. I think one has to really mention the Ministry of Health and Dr. McIntyre in particular in the management of the COVID epidemic, the COVID pandemic, and all of these people in planning and the Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Works, and who managed the reconstruction of the country after both Erica and Maria.
Mr. President, you mentioned her briefly earlier, but
Who?
Clara Savarin.
My wife, oh dear God, that's a tower of strength. We have children who are in their 40s, so we've been together for a very long time.
Wow.
My eldest daughter is 42, so I'm a grandfather. 4 times over, I have 4 grandchildren. And Clara and I, we've been together for quite some time, approaching 50 years.
How did you meet?
And I think she's a wonderful person. I think she's a tower of strength, and to be able to put up with me for all of that time, I think takes a special gift, you know. And so I believe that there is this saying that we have, that behind every successful man there is a powerful woman, and so on. And that is quite true.
How did you all meet?
Oh, that is most interesting. We're both from Portsmouth.
Yes.
And while I was in the Civil Service Association, I was in this thing of organizing carnival. So I was, at one time we were the main organizers of carnival in Portsmouth. We had a committee which we called the Portsmouth and District Improvement Committee, which sort of covered the north, down to Collihu. And so we would, and I used to build costumes for carnival. I built a costume for Miss CSA, and we won Miss Dominica with that costume. It was a peacock costume and so on. I think Eva Bruni was the girl whom we prepared and won. And then I prepared Clara for Miss Portsmouth Carnival competition and so on, and that is where it began.
It has blossomed ever since.
And blossomed ever since.
So you've had a good lady behind you all this time.
Absolutely. She's a very hard-working person. She's very hands-on, and so on. So
But she was a teacher.
she, for 40-something years.
Yes.
I only stood in the classroom for 7 years. She's been there for 40-something years. And,
But let's look at some other little trinkets. Calypso. You have been a popular target of Calypso over the years, as a matter of fact.
Well,
you have contributed probably to one of the lasting road mat songs.
as a subject,
Yes.
But the thing is, calypsos were written about me in Portsmouth as well as in Roseau. One calypso in Portsmouth while I was, in fact, I had bought myself a vehicle, a Mazda station wagon, and this guy in Portsmouth wrote this calypso. Song, Charles Savarin, go back to Roseau. Your face looked like a brand new Mazda. Leave Michael alone and go back to Roseau. And I think he became Calypso King in Portsmouth on that calypso. In Roseau, we had a lot of calypsos. I think, as the PM mentioned, perhaps the classic one is Marry the Girl Charlie.
Yes.
Which up to now, every carnival, it appears they have it in their repertoire, and you cannot have a carnival without Marry the Girl Charlie.
Is there some truth to that calypso?
We did get married in the morning. Yes, probably it was 6 o'clock as well. Yeah, very early in the morning. We went to the St. Alphonsus Church, and Father Thomas performed the wedding ceremony with family and friends. So very small.
Father Thomas did your ceremony?
Yes, Father Thomas. They baptized my children. He married me, and he buried my parents and my daughter, who died at 2 years age.
Excellency, you never seem unfazed. I've never seen you angry. Is that a trait that's deliberate?
Well, you've got to manage. I mean, you have a lot of issues that arise, and you don't have the luxury. Because if you're angry, you cannot think. You cannot act rationally. You act emotionally, and usually it is wrong. Not even your children you should correct in anger. If you're that angry, leave that for tomorrow. You will deal with it at a later stage, because you will. And this is probably where the whole question of abuse comes in with you. You act out of rage, you act out of anger, and so on. So you must always give yourself an opportunity to think rationally, and that requires you to ponder the situation that you're confronted with, and to ask yourself, well, what would be the best course of action to follow?
You are coming to the end of your public career.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, I think the presidency would be the pinnacle.
It
What
is.
advice would you give to the incoming president?
Well, everybody has to find, as it were, their own path. You can't and you should not seek to direct an incoming president as to what he or she should do. But there are a couple basic principles. First of all, you should have to be guided by the Constitution and applicable law. So if a matter arises, what does the Constitution provide? What does applicable law provide? And never feel that you have all the knowledge in the world. Seek advice, consult. There are people who are experts in the law, there are people who are experts in administration, there are people who have had all sorts of experiences. It is for you to identify persons who you can consult on any matter that arises. You have a staff. I have found the staff to be extremely helpful. Many of the staff members were here before me, that is to say, in the office of the president before I became president. So they are the repository, so to speak, of things, the function of the office of the president. Call them, ask them. Don't be shy at all to consult. Although people say I don't listen to people, now the point is, you do not limit yourself to one opinion.
Yes.
So if somebody has given you an opinion and apparently you didn't act on it, they may argue that they told you this and you didn't listen, but you've listened to other opinions. And you don't have to go back and to say, well, you said this, but that person said that. Every advice that you get is confidential. Mm-hmm. And you must treat it as confidential if you wish to continue to get advice. Because if you are advised by somebody and then you're going to tell somebody else, that person told me this, and you go and tell somebody else, then somebody may not have wanted that advice to have been made public, and will say, oh, I'm not getting involved in this. So advice which you get must be kept confidential, unless the person giving the advice indicates, well, you can share this with whoever you wish. But other than that, the person must feel free to give you the best of his advice, and therefore feel that he will keep it confidential unless he indicate that you can share it with others.
Any regrets over your years of service?
I have never had a job I did not enjoy. I was a teacher for 7 years, and I thoroughly enjoyed teaching. I was a trade union official for 17 years, and I thought I was able to do a tremendous amount of service to the public service in particular, and to all of Dominica. I served in Brussels for 7 years as Dominica's ambassador, and I think there I was able to represent the interests of Dominica and the OECS, particularly in the area of bananas, which was a fundamental economic value to us. When I returned, I spent 2.5 years at the NDC as general manager, and I believe set a platform for the development of tourism, both cruise and stayover. And then after the election, I served in various ministries, in the Ministry of Tourism, in the Ministry of Public Utilities and Ports, in the Ministry of National Security, and so on. And I thought I was able to achieve some measure of success in all of those ministries. And being a member of cabinet in itself is also something that, because beyond your own ministry, you in the cabinet you discuss the entire functioning of government, and you have an opportunity therefore to make a contribution to what the government does, not just what your ministry does, because there is collective responsibility in the cabinet. So you cannot say, well, this is not my ministry, so I am not, let them do what they want, because you are collectively responsible. If the government takes a decision which becomes unpopular, you have yourself got to defend that decision. So it would be better to give your point of view before the decision is made, but again, on the same basis of collective responsibility. Because the fact that you have an opinion does not mean that your opinion must prevail. There are other people in the cabinet who may have different opinions. So everybody has an opportunity to express his opinion, but once the decision is made as a member of the cabinet, your duty is to support it. And if you feel you cannot support it, then you resign from the cabinet.
What's next?
Oh, well, in the immediate future, I will devote more time to farming, which I have begun doing, and so on. I will seek to collect my notes and put them together, and perhaps do a memoir or two, or write a commentary or two, write an analysis or two of things that I have contributed to, and I have done and would have liked to have done, and would still like to see done.
Mr. Savarin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.